All right. My name is Tony Chase. I'm an assistant professor and the director of research for occupational therapy department at Indiana University.
And my name's Madison Loeser. I'm an occupational therapist practicing at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in the Wheelchair Skills and Management Lab.
So earlier this week, my son turned 6 years old, and that was hard for us as parents to see our kids grow up. But one of the things that we're navigating is now the at 6. How do we decide in terms of independence? Do we kind of let him do some things and then also still do some things for him and then kind of navigate that situation as many parents do? And our son does not have any disabilities that we know of at this point. So that's just a normal kind of experience for parents with kids without disabilities. When you add the disability component to that, now you're dealing with independence and regulating that as they kind of go out into a society that is also not built for accessibility, not built for their mobility and independence. And so caregivers, we find, for kids with disabilities are going through such unique situations. And so we have a program in which I'll tell you about in a second, that we teach wheelchair skills to kids in Indianapolis. But we've kind of realized that these voices of caregivers, because they're such unique situations, are so vitally important. And so that's really what this study is. It's looking at the caregiver perspectives as they've navigated through a wheelchair skills training program for kids. Okay, so the program is called Skills on Wheels, and so we have 5 Saturdays in which kids come to our facility. We go through the wheelchair skills training program, so that traditional kind of 33 plus skills, everything rolling forward and backward, all the way up to curbs, stairs, taking apart the chair, large ramps, things like that. We have another space called Caregiver Corner, where during the first half of that time, our caregivers are learning about wheelchair care and maintenance. They're networking with one another, and meanwhile, we have OT student involvement and PT student involvement as well, but primarily OT student involvement as trainers during this program. And that really makes up a good part of the team. We have some wheelchair manufacturers and suppliers, many of which that are represented in the expo here, that have volunteered their time. They work to do free care and maintenance on wheelchairs. We have registered OTs and PTs kind of overseeing a lot of it. And that just makes up a part of our team here. We have many staff and students and other people involved. And through that, we have used some measures, wheelchair skills test, WheelCon, worked with Paula Rushton to develop a pediatric version of that, so specifically geared at pediatrics, and a participation environment measure, children and youth, out of the Can Child Institute, and then these interviews with family. And so quickly, the quantitative piece. This is a qualitative study, so I'll just quickly glaze over the quantitative piece. And so frequency of participation, of course, is going to go down during that 5-week time because we've taken up all their Saturdays and they're in school. So their participation in anything outside of this is going to go down. That's an expected piece. One of the important things that we do see from this is that the involvement during participation significantly increases, but the desire for increased participation both in school and the community, significant increases. So parents are reporting, just to kind of clutter the data, parents are reporting they see their kids doing more. They want their kids to do even more now that they have engaged in this program. And so once again, clues in this idea of that parents are really engaging with this in a different way. And so through that, we looked across wheelchair skills. Actually, the significant increases all come at the higher level skills, because you see the pre are usually pretty low. So kids are trying things that they've really never tried before and gaining. But just to note that even significant or not, we saw increases across all of the measured wheelchair skills across the first few years of this program. This program started in 2021. We're now coming up on our 5th year. So just to summarize the quantitative pieces, significant decrease in fear of falling out of their chair. So we have that added on to the confidence piece. A significant increase in community participation, increase in parents' desire for further participation, both in school and the community. All measures across the WST increased, some significant on the higher level skills. We're working on studying the OT student involvement, and I know that this is a quick flyover of a lot of quantitative data. So this is published in Disability Rehabilitation Assistive Technology. So do check out that study if you're interested in hearing more about that. Also, I'll be around to tell you all that you want to hear about that. But moving into the qualitative piece, I will let Madison jump in and talk all about that specific part of the study.
All right. And so this qualitative study really came to fruition when we were sitting with that quantitative data we saw from before the start of the program to at the end of the 5 weeks, what that growth looked like for the children. And so we were heading into our third year of the program iteration, and we wanted to know a little more about what the long-term impact of the program looked like. And so even 8 to 9 months after children had participated in the wheelchair skills training program, how are these skills being integrated into day-to-day life? And on the other flip side of the coin, the study also wanted to look at feedback on the design of the program. And so we knew that qualitative data was uniquely designed to be able to answer these questions and that it captures that human experience in more nuanced and contextual ways. And so at the time that Tony and I completed this research, I was completing my doctoral capstone project. I was a student who had been involved in this program. And so, briefly, to run through the design, we completed an interview template. This was built with guidance of the social model of disability, anecdotal conversations with caregivers and participants, communication with key stakeholders in the program, and then also that quantitative data we were working with and personal experience working with the program. We recruited the participants. So the semi-structured interview setup was working with caregivers or parents of kids who had participated in the program 8 to 9 months after program completion. These parents participated in an open-ended interview. So the interview took place over Zoom. Those interviews were manually transcribed, uploaded to a platform where we started to code them for different themes. And so this open coding method helped us, we'll take a look at those themes in a moment, but helped us to find different topics that the parents found for how the program was impactful 8 to 9 months after. We then used a mixed methods approach to analyze the codes that we found. So here we'll take a look. Ooh. So to look at the themes, we had 5 buckets that we found that the feedback fell under. So program impact, occupational engagement. We looked at this meaningful engagement in 3 different settings, so community, home, and school settings. We then looked at program impact on quality of life factors, so physical skills that were gained, independence, confidence, socialization, and then of course we looked at barriers across all of these factors as well. Program resources and design. Tony had touched on some of the different elements of the program, so our caregivers spoke on a few of the elements and design pieces. And then one main bucket was the novelty and importance of the skills training program. And then also there was a lot of discussion about continued wheelchair skills practice in the future. When we analyzed the results, we used quantitative methods to look at the qualitative data. He's nodding because he's on the research side of this. It helped guide me through. And so we looked at code usage. So how many times the caregivers were talking about that particular topic. We looked at code coverage. So how long were they talking about that topic measured by character count? And then code sources. So how many caregivers talked about that particular topic? This helped us to then rank between those different qualitative themes, what was the most relevant to the most caregivers. And so we'll kind of briefly touch on a few of the strongest findings. First and foremost, every caregiver talked at great length about the positive impact of the program on an increase in physical skills. And so skills they painted a picture of how children were opening doors when they went to their mom's classroom at the end of the day. That had become a consistent part of their daily routine 9 months after the program had finished. Talking about problem solving, how to navigate different barriers in the community, sidewalk cracks, curbs. Also strength, looking at speed, endurance, those physical skill components, and how that contributed to keeping up with peers. As we pop over into an increase in independence, the next positive impact factor that we looked at, it's important to talk about code co-occurrence. So across all of these factors that we talked about, we see how they're all interwoven when we talk about an increase in physical skill performance, confidence, independence, how that flows into an increase in participation at school and in the community. So they all certainly intertwine. And so as far as an increase in independence, caregivers gave us a lot of specific examples of different contexts in which their children were hopping curbs at recess to get a ball that had run away, managing getting from the car to the school door at the drop-off line in the morning, getting onto the school bus or into their home using a ramp on their own without physical assistance, which prior to engaging in the program was something that parents had either automatically been helping with or the children had needed help with because that skill hadn't yet been built. As far as the actual program design, our caregivers gave a lot of meaningful feedback on areas that we could improve or expand, whether that was program logistics, so looking at the length, the equipment, possibly having 2 class tracks with more introductory or advanced class programs, but also building on different factors. So there was discussion about building on mentorship opportunities. And so Ed talked about the value of having peer trainers. We had peer mentors at our program, but really how we could foster and build that resource. Talking about the caregiver corner resource and how that was a source of learning and collaboration. We also had some feedback on different topics that would be helpful to touch on in the future. And then really a key finding fell within the topic of the novelty and importance of the skills training. And so when Tony developed the program in the first place, when we did a needs assessment for this research study in particular, we know that the literature tells us that there is a huge gap in formal skills training for using a manual wheelchair. And so caregivers really emphasized this when we spoke with them in the interviews. So talking about how they had never participated in a program like this before, other extracurriculars, whether it be sports or therapies, really hadn't touched specifically on building that toolkit of skills. Caregivers touched on the sentiment that nobody teaches you how to use the manual wheelchair. They felt like they were expected to know, but it's not something that's necessarily intuitive. In another thread, the novelty and importance was highlighted just in the context of social participation and building a community space. So we had kids coming from all across Indiana, whether it's urban, rural, suburban areas. And so some of the children were homeschooled or went to school with no other manual wheelchair users. And so just having that sense of community was impactful. And yeah, we'll round out here. So essentially just what we know, and that there's a lot of resources that go into the prescription of custom manual wheelchairs, but as far as having the formal time to train and learn how to use it meaningfully was something that they identified as being impactful.
So yes, this is also, while you're perusing disability rehabilitation assistive technology, this is also published there. So you can check out all kinds of more information about that. It's hard to put a qualitative study within a shorter presentation, but thank you to Honda USA Foundation and the Nielsen Foundation for a lot of their funding and support. And there are some references there. I will be available here for any questions and things like that afterwards. And thank you for your time.